History Zone, where the past comes alive.
I still remember the day the lie reached me. It arrived folded inside a newspaper so thin it nearly tore in my hands, its ink smudged by other men's fingers, men who, like me, were tired of losing. The headline promised gold in the San Juan Mountains, gold so thick in the streams you could scoop it like grain. The article named a place I'd never heard of before, but by the time I finished reading, it felt like it had already claimed me. They called it San Miguel City. According to the paper, it was already becoming the next great boom town. Mills under construction, saloons opening weekly, veins of ore assayed at impossible richness. The reporter wrote as if he'd seen it all himself, said men were pulling their fortunes straight out of frozen rock. I should have known better. Most of us should have. But in 1892, knowing better didn't put food on the table. I was 34 years old, worn down by failed claims and worse winters. I still remember the day the lie reached me. It arrived folded inside a newspaper so thin it nearly tore in my hands, its ink smudged by other men's fingers, men who, like me, were tired of losing. The headline promised gold in the San Juan Mountains, gold so thick in the streams you could scoop it like grain. The article named a place I'd never heard of before, but by the time I finished reading, it felt like it had already claimed me. They called it San Miguel City. According to the paper, it was already becoming the next great boom town. Mills under construction, saloons opening weekly, veins of ore assayed at impossible richness. The reporter wrote as if he'd seen it all himself, said men were pulling their fortunes straight out of frozen rock. I should have known better. Most of us should have. But in 1892, knowing better didn't put food on the table. I was 34 years old, worn down by failed claims and worse winters. I'd worked mines from Leadville to Crick Creek, always arriving just late enough to miss the real money. My boots were cracked, my hands stiff, my savings thin as paper. When that article said last chance before the rush closes in, it didn't feel like a warning, it felt like a dare. Within a week, I joined a wagon train heading south into the San Juans. We weren't fools. We brought picks, shovels, blasting powder, and enough supplies to last a month. But none of us packed doubt. Not enough of it, anyway. The mountains rose like a wall the farther we traveled. Snow lingered even in late summer, clinging to shaded slopes like it had no intention of leaving. Trails narrowed, wagons broke, horses limped. Still, men laughed around campfires, already talking about what they'd buy once the gold came easy. That was the first thing that should have frightened me. Easy never survives altitude. When we finally reached San Miguel City, it looked nothing like the paper promised. There were buildings, yes, but most were half-raised, leaning like tired men. Canvas tents flapped violently in the wind. A single sawmill screamed day and night, devouring trees faster than the forest could forgive. The air smelled of pine sap, coal smoke, and desperation. A man at the edge of town waved us in, smiling too quickly. He wore clean clothes for a place this rough, boots barely scuffed. He spoke like a preacher. "Gold's real," he said, before we even asked, "just waiting to be taken." I noticed something else, too. No ore carts, no loaded mules, No men returning from claims with the heavy walk of success. Instead, I saw thin faces, frost-bitten fingers, a saloon already louder than the mine offices, men selling tools instead of buying them. That night, I paid for a bunk in a boarding house whose walls rattled with the wind. I lay awake listening to it howl through the valley, sounding almost like laughter. Somewhere outside, someone fired a pistol into the dark, celebrating nothing in particular. I unfolded the newspaper again and read the article by candlelight. Same words, same promises, but now, surrounded by the mountain silence, they felt hollow. The lie hadn't revealed itself yet, not fully, but I could feel it breathing under the floorboards, waiting. And by the time winter came down from the peaks, that lie would decide who walked away and who stayed forever.
Morning came thin and cold, the kind that settles into your bones before you even open your eyes. I stepped outside San Miguel City just after dawn, breath fogging the air, boots crunching over frost-stiff ground. The mountains loomed close on all sides, tall enough to block the sun until it had earned the right to rise. Men were already moving, some eager, some desperate, but all heading the same direction, the claims. According to the town register, every man who arrived was guaranteed access to rich ground. The clerk behind the desk smiled as he handed me a folded map, his fingers clean, his nails trimmed. That should have been another warning. No one stays clean in real mining country. Still, I followed the markings into the hills. The trail climbed sharply, winding through rock and scrub pine, then narrowed into a series of hand-cut paths scratched into the slope. I passed dozens of claim stakes driven into the frozen soil, each tagged with a name and a date. Some were weeks old, some months. All promised the same thing. None showed proof. I reached my assigned claim by mid-morning. It sat on a steep incline where the mountain shed rock like skin. The ground was hard as iron. I drove my pick into it again and again, each strike ringing uselessly. When I finally broke through the surface layer, all I found was gray stone and thin seams of quartz. No color, no weight, no shimmer. By noon, I had blisters and nothing to show for it. I wasn't alone. Across the slope, other men worked in silence, their movements growing slower by the hour. Every now and then, someone would shout, more out of frustration than discovery. No one ran to investigate. We'd all learned already. Gold doesn't hide when it's real. In the afternoon, I followed a rumor instead. Someone claimed a stream farther up the ridge still carried flakes. I climbed until my lungs burned and my legs shook. When I reached the water, I dropped to my knees and panned until my fingers went numb. Nothing, just silt and broken hope. Back in town that evening, the saloon was loud, but the laughter sounded forced, like men trying to convince themselves they hadn't been fooled. I sat at the bar next to a prospector named Henry, older than me, beard gone white from frostbite rather than age. "You find anything?" he asked. I shook my head. "Neither did anyone else," he said, draining his glass. "Funny thing, though, every assay office still claims rich samples." That caught my attention. The assayer worked out of a sturdy building near the center of town, its windows always lit, its door always guarded. Men lined up daily, carrying chunks of rock wrapped in cloth. They'd come out smiling, waving papers that promised wealth beyond measure, yet no one ever struck rich. That night, I followed one of them. He staggered into the cold, paper clutched like scripture. I asked where his claim was. "Don't matter. Soon as the mill's finished, we're all set." "What mill?" I asked. He pointed vaguely towards the darkness. "There ain't one," I said quietly. He stared at me, confused, then angry. "Why you saying things like that? You trying to scare people off?" That was when I realized something worse than the empty ground. People didn't want the truth. They needed the lie. It justified the cold, the hunger, the weeks slipping by with nothing gained. If the gold was always just one step away, then failure didn't belong to them. Over the next days, I watched the pattern repeat. Men worked claims that produced nothing. Assays promised everything. Supplies grew more expensive. Food shrank. Snow crept lower down the slopes each night like a slow siege. And still, the town leaders smiled. I stood on my claim one evening as the sun vanished behind the peaks, the temperature dropping fast. My hands were bleeding through cracked skin. The mountain gave me nothing back. That was when I understood. This place wasn't unlucky. It was designed. And if I stayed much longer, the mountain wouldn't need gold to kill me. It would only need time.
By the third week, the mountain had stripped away every illusion except one. The gold was still coming, on paper. Every evening, men returned from the assay office grinning like winners, waving results that promised wealth so large it made hunger feel temporary. The numbers were always impressive: ounces per ton, purity percentages, projected yields that could buy farms back east or freedom from the mine forever. Yet not a single ounce ever appeared in daylight. I stopped working my claim and started watching people instead. The assay office sat at the center of San Miguel City like a courthouse, solid and well-built, its windows glowing long after sunset. 2 guards flanked the door, unusual for a place that claimed to serve miners. Inside, I knew, were scales, crucibles, acids, tools meant to reveal truth. But truth doesn't need guarding. One afternoon, I brought in a rock I had picked up a mile outside town, plain granite, clean as church stone. The assayer barely looked at it before marking my receipt and telling me to return the next morning. When I did, he handed me a paper that made my stomach turn. High-grade ore, exceptional yield. I stared at him. He didn't meet my eyes. "You sure this is from my claim?" I asked. He smiled thinly. "Stone speaks for itself." That was the moment certainty settled in. Not suspicion, certainty. They weren't testing rock, they were selling hope. I spent the next few days quietly asking questions. A carpenter mentioned that shipments of rich ore had arrived before the town even existed, barrels sealed tight, stored under guard. A mule driver said he'd hauled the same barrels back and forth between buildings, never opened, always watched. Salted ore. I'd seen it before in smaller scams, gold dust sprinkled into samples, enough to fool assays and investors. But this was industrial, organized, backed by men with money and influence. San Miguel City wasn't a mining town, it was a stage. The real audience wasn't us, it was the outside world. Investors, newspapers, rail interests hungry for the next boom. As long as men kept arriving and staying, the illusion held. And winter was their ally. Cold keeps men focused on survival, not questions. One night, Henry didn't come back from the saloon. They found him the next morning behind the assay office, frozen stiff, face bruised, one hand still clutching his paper. No one said murder, they said exposure, said he'd drunk too much, but I saw his knuckles, he'd fought. That was when fear replaced anger. I packed my gear that afternoon, lightened it to essentials. I planned to leave at first light, but word spreads fast in small places, and lies defend themselves violently. Just before dark, a man stepped into my path. Clean coat, city boots. "You asking the wrong questions," he said calmly. "I'm leaving," I replied. "After winter," he said. "No one leaves now." The snow started that night. It came down heavy and fast, erasing trails, burying stakes, sealing the valley shut. By morning, San Miguel City was trapped, wagons useless, passes gone, and the men who ran the lie smiled wider than ever. Food prices doubled in a week, then tripled. Supplies that had once been shared were now guarded. Saloons stayed open while stores went bare. Hope was still being sold. Survival was not. I stood at my window watching snow swallow the street, listening to the wind claw at the walls. Somewhere nearby, a man coughed, a dry, hollow sound that echoed too long. The gold rush lie had done its work. It had brought us here. Now it would decide how many of us were worth keeping alive.
Winter did not arrive in San Miguel City the way men expected to. It did not creep. It did not warn. It dropped from the mountains like a sentence already decided. Within 3 days of the first snowfall, the valley became a bowl of white silence. The wind erased every trail we'd carved into the slopes. Drifts piled higher than wagon wheels, sealing doors, bending roofs, swallowing the false optimism painted on every signboard in town. The passes were gone. The men who ran San Miguel City said help would come in spring. They said it casually, like spring was a promise instead of a gamble. By then, most of us understood what that meant. We were on our own. Food vanished first, flour rationed by the pound, beans counted like coins. Meat became a rumor. Prices rose until money stopped mattering. No one would sell what couldn't be replaced. I watched a man trade his revolver for a sack of oats. Another sold his boots and wrapped his feet in burlap. I kept my gear close and my mouth shut. The saloons stayed warm, though. Fires burned there every night. Whiskey flowed even as bellies emptied. It was cheaper to stay drunk than fed, and the men who controlled supply knew it. Drunk men don't organize. Drunk men don't leave. The mine offices stopped pretending altogether. Claims were temporarily suspended. Assay results were delayed. Paper promises piled up while the real world froze solid. Coughs spread through the town, then fevers. Frostbite claimed fingers first, then toes. I helped carry a man whose boots had frozen to his feet. We peeled them off like bark, skin coming with them. He screamed once, then went quiet. The mountain doesn't hurry death. It lets it work. At night, the cold crept inside even the thickest walls. Ice formed on the inside of windows. I slept in my coat, boots on, knife within reach. The wind moaned through the streets, a sound like something circling, waiting for weakness. Some men tried to leave. 2 brothers set out before dawn one morning, heading for a pass no one had crossed in weeks. They never returned. We found one body in spring, the other stayed with the mountain. After that, fewer tried. Fear had changed shape. It wasn't about being fooled anymore. It was about lasting one more day.
Men who argued about gold now argued over crumbs. Fights broke out over nothing. Knives flashed. Blood stained the snow dark and final. The leaders stayed hidden. That told me everything. I knew then the lie was no longer about gold. It was about control, keeping us dependent, keeping us weak. The more desperate we became, the easier we were to manage. I started counting supplies quietly, watching patterns, who still ate well, who still burned lamps late, who never seemed cold. One night I followed a supply runner. He led me to a locked storehouse near the edge of town, half buried in snow. Inside, through a crack in the door, I saw crates stacked high, food, blankets, coal, enough to save us all, enough to keep us obedient instead. That was when survival stopped being about endurance. It became about choice. I could wait, freeze, starve slowly, while men with clean hands decided who lasted, or I could risk the mountain. I returned to my room and laid out what little I had left: dried beans, a blanket, a map already outdated by snow, the knife Henry gave me before he died. The wind howled outside like a warning. By morning, I would either leave San Miguel City behind or join it forever.
The first man left at night. No announcement, no goodbyes, just a door opening softly, then closing, as if the sound itself might betray him. By morning, his bunk was empty and his boots were gone. Everyone noticed. No one spoke. The snow had settled into a hard crust by then, sharp enough to slice through worn soles. The wind had grown constant, no longer howling, just pressing, an endless weight that flattened sound and thought alike. The mountain had stopped threatening. It had moved on to claiming. The man didn't make it far. We found him 2 days later at the edge of town, curled behind a drift like he'd tried to hide from the cold itself. His beard was white with ice, his eyes open, fixed on nothing. He still had food in his pack. Fear spread faster than hunger after that. But fear doesn't stop desperation, it refines it. 2 more tried the following week, one at dawn, one just after sunset. The first returned by noon, face blue, hands useless, guided back by men who took his pack as payment for help. The second never returned at all. I watched men weigh their chances the way gamblers watch dice, counting days, measuring snow, listening to rumors of warmer valleys that might as well have been myths. Every night someone studied the passes like they could be memorized into mercy. The men who controlled the town said nothing. That silence was louder than any lie. Food was gone by then, replaced by substitutes that barely deserved the name. Sawdust mixed with flour, boiled leather, rats when they could be caught. I learned to eat slowly, not because it helped, but because it reminded me what eating used to feel like. Men began trading stories instead of plans, stories of places they'd almost reached, of towns just beyond the ridge, of help that was surely on the way. The stories grew brighter as reality darkened. That's when violence became normal. A fight broke out over a piece of bread no bigger than a fist. Knives flashed. Someone screamed. When it was over, one man limped away bleeding, and the bread lay in the snow, trampled and forgotten. No one bent to pick it up. I stopped sleeping at night. Too many footsteps, too many whispered arguments, too many eyes measuring me like meat. Then, one morning, a group left together. 6 men, armed, organized. They took extra food stolen from the storehouse I'd seen before. They didn't hide it. They didn't care anymore.
The man in charge tried to stop them. Words were exchanged. A gun was drawn, then another. The echo rolled through the valley like thunder. When it ended, 2 men lay bleeding in the snow. The 6 were gone. Hope followed them out of town. Days passed, no sign, no tracks, just wind and silence. On the 7th day, one of them came back. He staggered into town alone, face burned raw by cold, clothes torn, eyes empty. He collapsed in the street and never spoke a word. By nightfall, he was dead. That was the moment San Miguel City broke. Men stopped pretending this was temporary, stopped believing in spring, stopped trusting each other. Doors were barred, knives stayed drawn, even the wind felt closer, like it had stepped inside with us. I knew then that waiting would kill me. The mountain was deadly, but predictable. Men weren't. I packed what little remained to me before dawn. I chose a route no one else had tried, steeper, longer, but less watched. I wrapped my feet in cloth, tied my boots tight, and marked the doorframe of my room with my knife, not for luck, but as proof I had existed. As I stepped into the snow, the town behind me was already fading, its lie finally collapsing under its own weight. I didn't look back.
Hunger changes a man before it kills him. It sharpens the world at first. Smells become unbearable. Sounds feel closer. Thoughts circle the same ideas until nothing else fits. Then, slowly, it dulls everything. Pain fades. Cold becomes distant. Even fear grows tired. By the time starvation truly set in at San Miguel City, most of us were already ghosts. My cheeks had hollowed. My belt wrapped twice around my waist. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity itself had thickened. I rationed my food down to nothing. 3 beans in the morning, 3 at night. I counted them the way some men count prayers. Men stopped working entirely. There was no energy left for pretending. We stayed inside when the wind rose, huddled in layers that no longer warmed us, listening to the town decay. Wood creaked, roofs collapsed. Somewhere nearby, someone always coughed. That cough became the sound of winter. A man named Cole died in the room beside mine. Not loudly, not suddenly, he just stopped moving. When I checked on him the next morning, his eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, his breath gone so quietly it felt like theft. No one claimed his things. That told me everything. I took only what I needed: boots with soles still intact, a scarf, a few matches. The rest I left where it lay. Possessions had lost their meaning. Survival had not. Rumors spread of worse things happening in the outer tents, whispers of men who didn't die alone, of meat that wasn't mule or rat. No one spoke clearly. Clear speech makes things real. I stayed inside at night and kept my knife close. The storehouse remained locked, guarded by men who still looked fed. Their cheeks were full, their hands steady. They walked with purpose while the rest of us drifted. The imbalance was obscene. One afternoon, I saw a woman, one of the few left, collapse in the street. No one helped her, not because we didn't care, but because caring cost strength. She lay there until the snow covered her like mercy. That night, the town went silent in a way I hadn't heard before. No voices, no fights, no coughing, just wind. I knew what that meant. When a place grows silent all at once, it's because the living are deciding something. I finished my packing before dawn. My hands shook, not from fear, but from weakness. I wrapped my feet in cloth again and again, layered until I could barely feel them. I ate the last of my beans and did not save any for later.
There is no later when you hesitate. Before leaving, I climbed the ridge overlooking town. From there, San Miguel City looked small, fragile, nothing like the dream it had sold. Smoke rose thinly from a few chimneys. The rest lay dark and buried. I took a longer route than the others had, steeper, colder, less obvious. I avoided the passes everyone feared and aimed instead for a narrow saddle that followed a frozen creek. It would cost me strength I barely had left, but the mountain respects effort more than fear. By midday, my lips were cracked and bleeding, my hands numb. Each breath burned. I stopped often, not to rest, but to remind myself I was still moving. Behind me, the town disappeared entirely. Ahead, nothing promised safety. But between those two truths, only one offered a chance. I stepped into the white and kept walking, knowing that survival now depended on whether I could outlast the lie long enough to reach truth.
I had not gone far when San Miguel City finally collapsed. I was less than a mile out, camped behind a rock outcrop that shielded me from the worst of the wind. The cold there was cleaner, sharper, honest. I built no fire. Smoke carries stories, and I wanted no witnesses. That night, the mountain gave me a view. The moon rose pale and hard, throwing silver across the valley. From my perch, I could see the town below, dark, scattered, almost peaceful. Then, a light flared where no light should have been. Fire. It started near the storehouse. At first, I thought it was an accident, a lantern tipped, a careless hand. But then I saw figures moving fast, shadows sharp against the snow. More lights followed. Shouts carried faintly uphill, thin and broken by wind. The lie had finally reached its end. Men don't starve quietly forever. At some point, hunger becomes courage or madness. They had gone for the food, not to bargain, not to plead, to take. The guards fought. I could tell by the sound. Gunshots crack through cold air differently, clean, sharp, final. I counted them without meaning to. Then screams, then silence again. The fire grew. Crates burned easily, dry wood, packed straw. Years of hoarded survival turned to smoke in minutes. I watched flames leap high enough to paint the mountains red. Snow melted in great hissing patches around the building, steam rising like breath from a dying animal. Men poured into the street, some armed, some barely able to stand. Fighting broke out everywhere at once. Shapes collided, knives flashed. Someone fell and didn't get up. I did not cheer. I did not mourn. I watched. Because survival sometimes means knowing when not to go back. The fire spread to nearby buildings. A roof collapsed. Another caught. The wind, faithful as ever, fed the chaos. San Miguel City burned like it had been waiting for this moment all along. By morning, there would be nothing left to fight over. The mountain would take what the lie had spared. I slept little, not from fear, but from awareness. Every sound meant something out there. The crack of timber, a distant shout cut short, then nothing again. When dawn came, the valley was quiet. Smoke hung low, gray and defeated. The town looked smaller than ever now, scarred and broken. I could see bodies even from that distance, dark shapes against white, unmoving. The storehouse was gone. So was the illusion. I broke camp and continued climbing.
The cold worsened as elevation increased. My breath came shallow now. Each step felt like dragging the past uphill with me. I slipped once and slid several feet before stopping, heart hammering hard enough to hurt. The mountain does not forgive mistakes. Midday, I found tracks. One man, staggering, heading the same direction I was. I followed them at a distance, not to help, to learn. They ended abruptly at the edge of a ravine. I looked down and saw him there, broken against stone, his pack spilled open. Inside it, nothing but burned bread and ash. He had escaped the town, not the lie. I took nothing from him except the lesson. By evening, my hands were useless, my feet numb beyond pain. I forced myself to keep moving, counting steps, not distance. 10 steps. Breathe. 10 more. As night fell, I carved a shallow shelter into a snowbank and crawled inside. The wind screamed overhead, angry that I still lived. I closed my eyes knowing this. San Miguel City was finished, but the mountain was not done deciding who else would join it.
By the 8th day on the mountain, the idea of rescue no longer existed. There was no town ahead, no warm valley waiting just beyond the ridge. Those were thoughts meant for men who still had strength to waste. All that remained was the next step, the next breath, the simple refusal to lie down. I'd stopped feeling my feet entirely. That terrified me more than hunger ever had. I moved carefully, testing each step with my weight before committing. Snow hid everything: ice, rock, empty space. One mistake would end me as quietly as it had ended so many others. The mountain did not care about effort. It cared about balance. The sky stayed a dull white. Sun hid behind cloud and wind-scoured peaks. Time blurred. Morning and afternoon felt the same. I measured progress by exhaustion alone. At one point, I thought I heard voices. Laughter, faint but unmistakable. I stopped and listened until my ears burned with cold. Nothing, just wind curling through stone like something alive. That was when I understood how close I was to losing myself. Starvation does that. It turns memory into sound, hope into hallucination. Men wander off trails, chasing ghosts, and never return. I forced myself to speak out loud, not prayers, instructions. Left foot, breathe. Right foot, count. It felt foolish. It worked. By midday, I reached the frozen creek I had aimed for days earlier. It cut a narrow path through the mountains, steep banks rising on either side like walls. The ice was thick but cracked, spiderwebbing beneath my weight. I moved slow, crawled where I could. The creek led downward, and downward was life. That night, the temperature dropped harder than any before it. I dug into the bank and built a shelter barely large enough to turn in. I burned my last match to light a single candle stub and watched it flicker, wondering if that small flame had more life left than I did. I dreamed of warmth, not food, not gold, just warmth. I woke shivering so hard my teeth felt loose. The candle was gone, burned to nothing. So were 2 of my fingers. Frostbite. The skin was blackened, hard, already dead. I did not scream. Screaming wastes breath. I wrapped them tight and stood. That was the moment survival became a decision, not a condition.
I could stop, curl into the snow, let the mountain finish what it had started, or I could accept the cost. I chose the cost. I followed the creek for 2 more days. My pace slowed, but gravity helped. Trees grew thicker, the air softened slightly. On the 3rd morning, I smelled smoke, real smoke. I collapsed before I ever saw them. When I woke, there was a fire. Hands held me down gently while someone poured warm liquid into my mouth. I tried to speak and failed. Someone laughed softly, the sound more human than anything I'd heard in months. They were trappers, seasonal, camped low, waiting out winter like men who understood it. They said I'd walked nearly 40 miles. They said I shouldn't have survived. I said nothing. Some truths don't need witnesses.
I stayed with the trappers until spring loosened the mountain's grip. They did not ask many questions. Men who live off the land learn that survival stories belong to the teller, not the listener. They fed me slowly, carefully, as if coaxing something fragile back into the world. When my strength returned, it did so unevenly. Legs strong, hands scarred, nerves dulled by cold that never truly leaves you. 2 fingers never came back. I learned to live without them. By late April, the snow retreated just enough to reveal paths again, narrow, dangerous, but passable. The trappers broke camp and headed west. I headed east, toward places that still believed in maps and names. I did not return to San Miguel City. I did not need to. From a high ridge, I looked back once. The valley lay quiet and untouched, as if nothing had ever happened there. No smoke, no sound, just snow melting into mud, covering what remained. The mountain did what it always does. It erased. Down lower, I reached a settlement that still lived. Real people, real work, no promises written in ink. They listened when I spoke, though I kept it brief. Men who haven't been hungry enough don't understand hunger stories anyway. News travels slowly, but it travels. By summer, word reached me that San Miguel City had been declared a fraud. Investors vanished, names disappeared. The men who engineered the lie were never found. Some said they fled east with pockets full of money. Others claimed the mountain kept them. I do not know. I only know what I saw. I took work where I could, cutting timber, hauling freight, anything that kept me moving. Gold no longer tempted me. I had seen what it cost when it wasn't real. Sometimes at night I still hear wind the way it sounded up there, flat and endless, like something patient. I wake with my heart racing, my hands numb, counting fingers that aren't all there. That mountain followed me down. Years later, curiosity finally pulled me back, not into the valley, but close enough. The trail markers were gone, the map names scratched out. I stood where San Miguel City once claimed to be and found nothing but rotten beams and rusted nails poking through weeds. No graves, no markers, just absence. That, I think, was the final cruelty of the lie. It didn't even leave a story behind for those who died in it. No monument, no warning sign, just another blank space on a map where men once believed too hard. I left a mark there, a shallow cut in a tree, the same way I had marked my door frame before I escaped. Proof that someone had stood there and walked away. Not because I was stronger, because I stopped believing. That is what saved me. Not gold, not luck,
but knowing when a promise is worth less than the snow it's written on.
People like to believe ghost towns die loudly. They imagine gunfights, final fires, a last man walking out while the wind howls behind him. That makes the story clean, entertaining, safe. San Miguel City did not die that way. It faded. The snow buried the streets first, then the roofs, then the memory. By the time spring returned, there was nothing left to argue over, nothing left to steal, nothing left to save. The mountain folded the lie into itself and moved on. That is how most false promises end, quietly. I have lived a long time since then, long enough to see new rushes rise and fall, silver, oil, land, each one carried by the same language I read in that newspaper so many years ago. Last chance, easy fortune, act now. Different words, same hunger. Men still follow them. Sometimes when I pass through towns that grew honest and slow, I imagine what San Miguel City could have been if truth had been enough. A place of hard winters and harder work maybe, but real. Instead, it chose speed, chose deception, and paid in lives. People ask me now why I never returned to mining. I tell them the mountain taught me everything I needed to know. It taught me that nature does not lie, it only sets terms. Cold will kill you, hunger will weaken you, gravity will pull you down if you misstep, but it never pretends otherwise. Men do. The men who built San Miguel City counted on that difference. They knew hunger makes people believe. They knew isolation keeps questions quiet. They knew winter would finish the work they started. They were right. What they didn't count on was someone walking away with the story intact. I do not speak the names of the men who died there, not because I've forgotten them, but because the town already erased them once. Speaking their names here would only give the lie more power than it deserves. Instead, I remember the lessons. If a place promises wealth without evidence, walk away. If truth needs guarding, question it. If survival depends on believing something that defies your eyes, trust your eyes. Most of all, know this: gold has never been your life. Not real gold, not imagined gold, not the kind printed in ink by men who never planned to stay. San Miguel City exists now only in wind and snow and the bones of wood hidden under soil. A ghost town born not from bad luck, but from a decision to lie and see who paid the price. I paid part of mine, others paid all. When the wind comes down from the peaks just right, I still hear it move through that valley, brushing over where streets once were, where men once stood arguing about paper promises. The mountain remembers, and now so do you.